my team behind me that represent what I would say is the fiscal conscience of our Republican conference. And it has never been more necessary to have fiscal hawks and budget champions and people who still believe that if we work together, if we have the discipline and the sense of urgency and the political courage, we can right the ship before it sinks. And we can hand this country to our children better than we found it and not be that first generation of American elected leaders who failed to allow our children to inherit the blessings of liberty. Nobody can look at our broken balance sheet, our unsustainable spending, and the debt that is now $33 trillion and climbing, the highest indebtedness of this nation since World War II, and we're in relative peace and prosperity, and things get worse really fast. No one can look at that. No leader worth their salt in this town can look at it and not shudder at the irreparable harm and the catastrophic consequences, not only for our citizens of today, but generations of Americans who will inherit not the blessings of liberty, but the curse that our fourth president talked about. And by the way, our founders warned us about excessive debt repeatedly. My favorite was what James Madison said: a public debt is a public curse, and in a Republican form of government, the worst of its kind. We don't have to wait for a Greece-like sovereign debt crisis to know the ill effects of this large and growing debt. It's exacerbating the cost of living crisis. It's putting upward pressure on interest and inflation. It's crowding out private investment and therefore growth and our ability to recover. It's squeezing our ability to fund our national priorities like infrastructure, defense, for example. Defense is being funded now per GDP at the lowest levels since pre-World War II. And will probably drop if we don't change course below 3%. Meanwhile, China and other adversaries of ours are making the investment. That's the first and most important job. My point is this. If you have a debt-related crisis, whether it's a slow economic demise, the termites, as they say, at the front porch, or the bear at the front door, where you have a catastrophic, sudden, Greece-like crisis. Either way, we lose the country. We lose future prosperity. We lose our security. We can't put a military on the battlefield to defend our freedom and interest. And again, our children will inherit the whirlwind and a new world order where America is not the leader of the free world. So that's what's at stake. I can't think of anything more important, and I can't think of a threat bigger to the 21st century for this great nation of ours than to do the following: to rein in this out of control spending, especially the mandatory spending that's driving the debt, to restore fiscal responsibility, and to reverse the curse. Here's how we do it in a nutshell as an outline, and then I can get into the details in the Q&A session. First, we've got to get this important work on discretionary done. Don't diminish the importance of right-sizing a bloated bureaucracy that has grown hundreds of billions of dollars since COVID. We have to eliminate the waste, and we have to right-size post-COVID. And we do that in our bill, in our framework, if you will, our 10-year budget blueprint to balance, by resetting our next year budget at 22 and controlling spending at 1% a year, which will save over $3 trillion. There are other items under discretionary, but the mandatory spending and the runaway entitlement spending is what's driving the debt. We talk about health care reforms. We talk about welfare reforms. And then we have an assortment of other mandatory programs that we need to make more cost effective, and then, of course, eliminate the waste. Speaking of waste, we now have $2 trillion of wasteful and fraudulent spending in the form of improper payments. When I was a freshman with Drew Ferguson, I think it was 1.5 trillion. It was 1.5 trillion. Last year, the improper payment rate was 250 roughly billion. You got Medicaid at 80 billion last year. You've got the Farm Bill supplemental nutrition at 12 billion. So this shouldn't be a partisan issue. We should find ways to steward the taxpayer dollars in a responsible way and also responsibly make sure the money goes to where it was intended for the people who need it the most. We also reduce interest as we reduce our principal, so we save trillions of dollars there. And then lastly, you can't grow out of a $16 trillion, $33 trillion debt hole, but $16 trillion in order to balance. You can't just grow out of it. But you need to be able to grow faster than your spending. You've got to grow faster than inflation plus population. This budget does that. We return to pro-growth, pro-work, pro-energy policies that we know will reignite this economy, and will return to what we were experiencing before COVID, which is unprecedented growth and prosperity. And when I say prosperity, all boats were lifted up on the tide of a growing economy. We had the lowest poverty rates in recorded history. The lowest unemployment for females, for minorities, for all Americans in recorded history. So this is our plan. This blueprint is the path for our country to balance its budget. We have a surplus of $130 billion. We don't cut Medicare benefits, and we don't cut Social Security or veterans benefits. But let me be clear. In this 10-year window, both the Social Security and the Medicare trust funds will become insolvent. We do what I think is the most practical thing and the most realistic way to address those highly sensitive and highly important safety nets for seniors. We have a recommendation for what you've heard talked about, no doubt, a bipartisan commission to look at that long-term unfunded liability and hash through all the ideas that should be on the table and come up with a consensus, a bipartisan consensus, so we can give seniors peace of mind and so we can make those programs not only solvent but sustainable for future retirees. Folks, that I believe that's what the last time we had to fix these programs and solve these problems, we had Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill basically come up with that consensus, and there was a Greenspan commission that preceded that helped sort of hash through those things. So with that context, I'd like to thank publicly my colleagues for their work on behalf of their constituents. If it's Ralph Norman, it's probably more on behalf of his 17 grandchildren. If you talk to Tom McClintock, he's the senior member on this committee. It's probably his sanity we've saved by having this blueprint. Too late, he says. But I want to say thank you to the team. This was a team effort. Everybody made their contributions, and I couldn't be more proud. You know, you can't have responsible budgeting if you don't have a budget. You can't have the debate, and you certainly can't hash out and cut a path. And you're doomed to fail if you just stand idly by and accept the status quo. These guys don't accept the status quo, and I'm just so thankful for what they did to contribute to our Reverse the Curse plan for restoring fiscal responsibility in this town, in this institution, and for the sake of our children and the greatest nation in the history of the world. So with that, I'd like to ask our senior Republican member and a good friend, a guy that I've learned a lot about budget as a freshman in the 115th Congress, Tom McClintock.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your leadership. You know, just as you cannot drink yourself sober, you cannot spend yourself rich, you cannot borrow your way out of debt, and you cannot tax your way to prosperity. And yet those are the three principles upon which Bidenomics is founded. No nation in the world has ever spent and borrowed and taxed its way to economic health, but many, many nations have spent and borrowed and taxed their way to economic ruin, bankruptcy, and collapse. Before any nation can ensure domestic tranquility or provide for the common defense or promote the general welfare, it must be able to pay for them. And our nation's ability to do so is coming into grave doubt. I believe this budget is a good faith effort to apply the principles of fiscal responsibility to federal spending before we're faced with a crisis that we can no longer pay for. History is screaming this warning at us that nations that bankrupt themselves simply aren't around very long. Let that not be the legacy of this generation, and let that not be the epitaph of the American Republic.
Well said. Thank you, Tom. From the Palmetto State, as I mentioned, a guy who desperately wants to ensure the prosperity, the freedom, and the security that all Americans deserve, but certainly what he expects to hand to his 17 grandchildren. Ralph Norman.
Thank you, Jody. Thank you for your work on this, tireless work that you never see, but you've been a great leader on this, as well as my other colleagues. Folks, let me put this in perspective for you. And I think it was Dave Swikert at caucus meeting this morning said, do you realize the interest that we pay is $20,000 per second? The interest on the debt, $20,000 per second. That's not sustainable. That is not real. To maintain our republic, we have got to, as Jody aptly named what we're doing, reverse the curse. And, you know, it's something, it starts with putting it on paper. I'm a developer. I build houses and other things. If I tell you I'm going to build you a house, what do I have to do? I have to give you a blueprint to tell you what I'm going to provide. What Jody and this team has done is put a blueprint together on how we're going to handle the 20,000 second problem, curse, I would put it. Now, you've heard politicians talk about it for a long time. I'm tired of talk. One thing I realized in Washington, D.C., every dollar that's spent has got an advocate for it. Every dollar. Now, is this going to be easy to meet? No. What is it going to take? I'm going to use the C word. It's going to take courage. We've got to have the willingness to say no, even if it's to projects that may or may not affect our state. We're looking at the survival of our country. No one can argue that 32 trillion is sustainable. No one can argue that Social Security is going bankrupt in 2035. No one can argue that the Highway Trust Fund is not going bankrupt sooner than that. And I was in a Rules Committee last night for a long period of time, and all my Democrat friends on the other aisle, great people, but you know what their answer is? Higher taxes. Not one time was there one mention of a cut. There is no way to sustain this, to do this, to reverse the curse, other than have cuts. And the only thing this administration has given us is a treasure of things to cut. 87,000 IRS agents is a joke. the new FBI building with buildings sitting vacant all over this town is a joke. The Green New Deal, so many things, which is crony capitalism, is a joke. Now, we've got to have the courage to say it out loud. And I don't care what the media says. I don't care what the naysayers say. We have to do it for the survival of our great republic. And folks, I would ask you, if not now, when? When are we going to do something? I can put all the numbers up and float them before you. But unless we're willing as elected officials to put our money where our mouth is, literally, and actually take the cuts out that's needed to right this country, that's the only survival that we have. And I'm just committed to working on this. Jody and everybody up here will do the same. And we need your help. I look out here, y'all are young people. I was where you were years ago. You ought to be concerned. It ought to make you mad about what's happening to this country. And it's not Democrat, it's not Republican. It's un-American what's happening to our spending. It's un-American where some of those that are supposedly controlling the money in this town go. But we've got the power to change it. We have got the tools to do it. The issue is, do we have the will and do we have the courage? I think we do. I think there's no greater time than today. And I look forward to working on it with members as the markup goes tomorrow and putting something before you. Is it perfect? No. Nothing's perfect. But it gets us on a path of sustainability. Help us get the word out. And Jody, again, thank you for all that you've done and will do with this.
Thank you, Ralph. Thank you, Ralph. Well said. One of my closest friends, and we came in together in the 115th. We served on budget. Chief Deputy Whip Drew Ferguson.
Thanks, Jody. In an unusual move, I asked to be back on the budget committee this cycle because I know how important this moment is for us. But the budget committee, there's a lot of tough sledding that goes on. There are a lot of tough votes that you've got to take. There's a lot of hard work. But one of the reasons I really wanted to do this was to support Jody's vision as chairman of the budget committee to produce a document that was both politically courageous and intellectually honest. I want you to think for just a minute, all of you that are here today and Americans across this great land, think about what's happening to your very own budgets right now. You are having to make decisions, and American families are having to make decisions about what to cut. Things that they once enjoyed, things that they may have wanted. They've had to scale back their dreams from what they used to believe was possible. And when you do that, you have to make hard choices. And what this budget does is it says, without touching two of the most important programs in this country, Social Security and Medicare, we have identified how we get to balance in 10 years without the use of gimmicks and being intellectually honest in our effort. And as you will read through this budget, many of these things that we have to cut may not be things that we want to cut. They're things that we have to cut. So when you look at it and go, here are the choices that Republicans have made in this budget, we're simply saying we don't have the money to pay for these things, and it doesn't make sense to borrow our children and our grandchildren's money to pay for the things that we want right now. Mamas and daddies, families across this land would never say we're going to borrow money for our wants and needs and put it on the backs of our children and grandchildren. And this government shouldn't do that either. There are challenges. I cannot wait for the debate that will occur tomorrow during the budget markup. I look forward to the debate about which programs are vitally necessary for this country, which programs will continue to bankrupt this country, and the things that we have to fight for. So with that, I look forward to the debate tomorrow. I look forward to the markup. And again, I want to thank our chairman for his courageous work in getting us to a product that we feel really strongly about, feel really good about, and we know sets America on the right fiscal path. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. Again, well said. I think you can tell these guys, their heart's in it all the way. And as my friends have said, it's not perfect, but it is a path, and it is on the table for debate, and we welcome that debate. We just want the end result, which is a country on good fiscal footing. Our friend and guy that started the Doctor Caucus, he chaired the healthcare subcommittee at ENC. A huge part of getting to that place that we all describe and restoring fiscal responsibility is healthcare. It's not just healthcare programs, it's the healthcare system in this country that is failing everybody. And so I'm honored to work alongside the founder of the Doc Caucus and my friend and fellow Texan, Dr. Burgess.
Thank you, Chairman. So the admonition here is be careful what you pray for. I wanted to be in this fight. I wanted to lead on the healthcare task force on the budget committee. This is something that I asked for because obviously our greatest federal spend comes in the healthcare space. One of the things that I have committed myself to is convincing members on both sides of the political divide that coverage does not equal care. But boy, you're going to need the care in the years to come. That's why this outline is so significant. Without harming Social Security and Medicare, the budget is going to deliver on the promise. Look, we've always had debt. This is not new. The problem is we've never had this much debt. And I think Drew Ferguson said it extremely well. I was sitting in line at a Walmart back home over the weekend, and a young woman who I've known long before I ever went to Congress came up to me and fairly pitiful amount of groceries in her cart, said, "It's ridiculous. This is going to be $100. It's just so hard right now. And we have got to understand how hard this debt has been on our constituents and adjust our spending accordingly. So we're not talking about being draconian. We're not talking about taking away things that people need. But what we're talking about is building a sustainable future. So thanks to the courage of Chairman Arrington, we're all here. We're all in this fight. And no time like the present. Thank you.
Here. Well, with that, folks, if you got any really difficult questions, I'd ask Tom McClintock and Dr. Burgess to come up and take those. I'll take all the easy ones. Let me say that it's difficult for business people who've never served in and around public service and politics in this town to wrap their mind around that we don't live within our means and that we borrow and print seemingly infinitum. Because there's no way they sustain their business. They don't pay the bills. They don't keep people on the payroll and support the livelihoods of their coworkers if they don't live within their means and balance their budget like every state does it, every family does it, and every business does it. Chuck Edwards came to this town as a businessman. He asked great questions. He's eager and earnest just to do the right things to get us to the right place. So, Chuck, I know you share our sentiments, and if you want to say a few words later, I'll let you jump in here. But I know you just wanted to stand strong with us, right? Yeah. Tar Heel State. Right. Questions, comments, thoughts? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Chairman. As you all know, Medicare is the largest federal health program spending-wise. It's only projected to increase by the CBO. You're proposing creating this bipartisan commission. How is the bipartisan commission going to recommend reducing spending without cutting Medicare benefits?
Well, I don't think any party will achieve whatever the programmatic reforms or pay-fors you're going to have. There are plenty of ideas on both sides. Programmatic reforms and pay-fors. No one's going to strike that balance, no party, I should say, on their own. It's just not practical. It's too politically sensitive. I would also suggest it is too readily weaponized. So as soon as one party or the other comes out with their grand plan to save Social Security or Medicare, it will be used as a baseball bat against the other. What happens in that situation? Both parties retreat to the corner, and we don't lead. And we leave our seniors wondering and worrying, and we leave taxpayers with a bigger bill because every year it gets more expensive to fix it. Drew Ferguson's the chair of the Social Security Subcommittee. I'm certain that every one of these gentlemen standing behind me have studied this, have looked at it from every angle, and have their own thoughts and ideas on how to address the insolvency. And again, how to strengthen it and make it sustainable into the future, because you can fix the solvency, but there are some structural issues that have to be addressed. We just believe if it's going to be fixed, and it will be and should be, it should be done sooner rather than later, and it needs to be done on a bipartisan basis because that's the only sustainable path to that consensus. And I'd like to get to the Ronald Reagan Tip O'Neill outcome, but before the roof is caving in. I mean, they did it in the 11th hour, but I will suggest that the Greenspan Commission helped hash through that and sort of grease the skids for a final consensus deal. So, look, this is a sobering stat, and I'm just using the public debt, not the gross debt. CBO projects $117 trillion of additional debt on top of our 33 present debt in 30 years. That's the unfunded liability for our nation. 99% of that 117 trillion are the two programs you mentioned. And so it's inescapable. We're going to have to make tough decisions, but we're going to do it together as a Congress and as Americans first. And that's the best path to that solution. So back here, and then I'll come here. Yes, ma'am.
Can you walk me through the thought process of cutting SNAP and by how much do you propose?
Well, I can give you a specific number later, but let me just tell you, it's significant because we put forward in the Limit, Save, Grow what I thought were reasonable and responsible. For example, this is one element, work requirements for able-bodied adults. And it got watered down. I mean, we accepted, some of us did. I voted for the FRA, which was the consensus deal, okay, but we started at a much stronger position. And so I think we need to strengthen work requirements, but not just in food stamps and the food stamp program, but also in Medicaid. We don't have them in Medicaid. We could probably strengthen TANF's work requirements. It's also eligibility issues. It's also income and asset tests. We don't have state partners really in making sure that the money that we do steward on behalf of taxpayers goes to the people who are most in need. And so we need states to participate with us as partners with skin in the game. So one piece of that is states need to share in the responsibility and be given the flexibility so they can ensure that the financial controls are there where we're not just totally wasting money. So it's a number of things. Those are a few, areas of reform, but it is more than work requirements. It is comprehensive. And let me make one more comment about food stamps. I was on the Ag Committee in the last Farm Bill. Nobody begrudges American families and individuals who work hard, some 2-3 jobs, and they still struggle to make ends meet. We want to help those people. Now, I'm not sure the current food, supplemental nutrition program is set up so that those people get the help they deserve, but we want to help those folks. But there's been an expansion of benefits beyond the inflationary cost of food, for example, in this, and beyond the inflationary cost of medicine. And so I think with respect to food stamps, there's been a unilateral expansion that's cost 30 to 40 billion a year, well beyond the inflationary cost of food. So we have a comprehensive set of reforms, and it's not just for the supplemental nutrition, it's for all means-tested welfare programs. So we don't, and this is key, so we help people who need help, we provide temporary assistance, and that we help people mostly by encouraging them to come up and out of it and not be trapped, because worse than the fiscal implication is the humanity implication when people are dependent on the government, because our policies trap them there. So I hope that answers your question. Yeah, please.
When you look at cutting these, as you described it, as cutting these programs, it's really about incentivizing our fellow Americans to get back to work. I want you to think about how badly we need every single American that is able to work, participating in the workforce right now. We need our fellow Americans' talents to help us solve the problems that we're facing. We need their creativity, we need their experience, we need their energy. One of the major problems that we have with inflation right now, not only are we spending too much money, but we're doing things that drive down American productivity. So we aren't solving that side of the equation. We think we can solve all of this by simply raising interest rates. We've got to have increased productivity, and that means having our fellow Americans back in the workforce. Here's another important part to think about this. Every single one of our fellow Americans that's earning a paycheck and they're working hard every single day is contributing to Social Security and Medicare. Without that participation, those programs are more vulnerable and will become insolvent more quickly. And a question was asked earlier about Medicare and how do you solve that? Look at the piece of healthcare that is growing the fastest, and it is administrative cost. Doctors are getting paid less right now. Patients are receiving less care. And what we've got to do is we got to go after the thing that is increasing the quickest, which is what we do in this budget, which is to go in after rising administrative costs that simply don't add to better outcomes. So while we look at how we help the most vulnerable, we also have to encourage our fellow Americans to get back into the workforce to help us solve the inflation problem and to help us solve Social Security and Medicare. Without them, we can't. The government can't do it. Americans getting back to work is a big part of solving this problem.
And the labor participation rates, as you know, are lower than they were pre-COVID, and they're really bad relative to historic numbers in the work-capable prime age male adults. So something's not right. The incentives are certainly not right, and the numbers suggest we can do much better. Not just by the budget, but by our fellow Americans.
Last question.
I just want to add to the question that Axios asked earlier. I mean, it is not all bad news. A letter that Sheldon Whitehouse received from the Congressional Budget Office last March outlined how the expenditures in Medicare for the 10 years 2010 to 2019 were actually significantly lower than what they had projected, what CBO projected in 2010. Now, yeah, I get it. Democrats quick jump on that, say Obamacare saved money. But that would presuppose that Obamacare began to save money before it was passed. If you widen the lens out a little bit, what actually made a difference was the prescription drug benefit that was passed in 2003 and then implemented in 2006. So you're beginning to pick up the effect of treating the high cholesterol, treating the hypertension, bringing that disease burden under management, which is what occurred after the Part D benefit. There are actually some things, and I'm a big believer in personalized medicine. I think there are significant cures that are out there just over the horizon. We need to keep our eye on those as well, and we cannot let this budget problem eclipse those discoveries that are just on the cusp of happening. So that, again, I just wanted to stress that it's not all bad news from the healthcare front. There has been some good news. Our job then is to understand why the good news is out there, be sure that people understand why the good news is out there, and make certain that we keep it on a path that's sustainable. Thank you.
Well said. We'll take a couple more, and then I know we got to get out of here. I hate leaving people that not give them an opportunity to ask. We worked too hard. It's been too long that this place has had a real budget to talk about, and we need you to start talking about it. We'll take whatever criticisms come, but we need to talk about it. Yes, sir.
And Chairman Arrington, one, why does this proposal not repeal Obamacare? And two, why does it not increase the retirement age for Social Security?
Again, no matter what you do with Social Security, it's going to divide Congress such that we will not have a productive problem-solving exercise. That's the politics of it. Doesn't mean I don't have opinions about how we should solve the insolvency and the unsustainability. I have my own views, and I've been on the Social Security subcommittee and have expressed those views on that committee. It's not productive for us today, one party or another, to try to solve it alone, because we know ultimately that won't happen. It will ultimately be a consensus solution. So why not lead by just creating a mechanism that forces us into a room? The White House, Congress, Republicans, Democrats, so we can actually make some progress. I've heard the chairman say that we need to just agree on the numbers. We need to get the trust fund folks, the trustees, to come in, just like in this budget. The first hearing we had was the fiscal state of the nation. You know what the goal was? To say, hey, we've all made contributions to this financial mess we're in, both parties. Now, I've been clear about that from day one, and I think these guys would agree. However, it's a math problem, and if we can't agree on the numbers, on the deficits, the interest, the health care cost, and all the things that are driving it, mandatory versus discretionary, boy, I've never solved any problem where you can't get all sides to at least acknowledge what the problem is and sort of define that. That's something that is a first step, at least I've heard you talk about, Mr. Chairman. Look, on health care, I think my most, sort of big picture statement is we have problems with the healthcare system, and the changes to the system, I think, are more important than any one program. That is, we have healthcare monopoly forces that prevent the competition, that give me and my family and other American families real choice. It's too convoluted and too opaque for anyone to understand the current system. Big government like Obama, by the way, we repealed the roughly $60 billion of the Obamacare expansion that happened in the IRA. And we try to put the incentives for the healing to happen between doctor-patient relationship without the red tape. And then we also try to get not only big medicine out of the way, but big government. And it's a list of things, and it's a long list. I'm happy to go through it with you, but it's really unleashing market forces, competition, and giving individuals the opportunity to have personalized medicine that meets the needs of them and their family. And I think Obamacare has been a disaster, and I think it should be repealed. And I think that it's done nothing to make health care affordable. You heard from our chairman of the healthcare task force. People got an insurance card. They didn't get health care. Health care cost doubled, and we had fewer choices. I'm not questioning the intentions of my colleagues. I think they wanted a more affordable health care system. But their government mandates and taxes and regulations did what I think always seemed to happen, which is make the prices go up, give us few choices, and make the quality go down. So, next question, and then we'll wrap it up. We'll have you bring us home.
Well, you're going to feel bad here because I actually have like two technical questions and one substantive question.
Okay.
First of all, congratulations on getting something together.
Thank you.
It's a very difficult thing to do.
Thank you.
So,
Appreciate it.
the two technical questions.
Is this why you warmed me up before that big
The first technical question is the 1% limit on growth discretionary, does that apply to defense?
No,
Okay.
no, it's flexible. And I just want to reiterate something. There is all kinds of waste in the Pentagon. There is no one on this budget committee. I haven't met someone in the entire conference that doesn't believe that. So we need to redirect that waste in a way that gives the military, our troops, the resources they need. So if you think about it, even with the flexibility on where that 1% cap comes from, the military, we need to invest to get it back to a place where it's not dangerously low like it is today. But the way they are doing that, and I think Mike Rogers just proved this out, he found $40 billion of legacy issues and inefficiencies in waste, and he redirected that towards our posture against China, new warcraft, et cetera. That's how it needs to work.
You don't have any reconciliation instructions, which are kind of considered the teeth in a budget resolution. Why not?
Listen, I just think we have what I believe is the core elements of a budget. We've got the policies the policy assumptions that presume on the savings on mandatory. We've got the discretionary budget, which is more than just our cut and cap. It's got no more one-time emergency spending for recurring non-emergency items. That's an old gimmick of Washington that both parties have used, unfortunately, to disguise increases in money. I think there'll be a time and place for reconciliation, but let me also be clear. And both parties are guilty of it. Look, we're trying to be as frank and as, open to where the problems are and the solutions to solve them. But reconciliation was a tool, not to advance the Republicans' policy agenda or to advance the Democrats' policy agenda. Reconciliation was there and created to reconcile the difference between what we're spending and the revenue that we bring in and the gap that we have to borrow to pay for this government. And both parties are guilty of not using reconciliation to actually reduce the deficits that will ultimately reduce the debt that will help save the country from a debt crisis. So I hope that we can actually get back to using reconciliation in that manner, which it was intended for, and not for some ancillary, no matter how important it might be, policy agenda for both parties.
And lastly, this is the more substantive part.
Yeah.
I think. You mentioned that the tax cuts in the summer here would be presumably extended. The 2017 individual tax cuts that expire in 2025 would be extended in a deficit-neutral way, which would imply cuts elsewhere. At the same time, you have cuts in Medicare, Medicaid.
We don't non-benefit Medicare cuts like site neutrality, like hospital debt that we're paying at 100%, that we don't need to pay at 100%. They need to share some of that. But I just want to make sure it's clear. We don't cut Medicare benefits and we don't cut VA benefits, et cetera.
We're still going to have Democrats say that you're paying tax cuts on the backs of the elderly and the poor.
Yeah. Here's what I'd say. The Democrats, my colleagues, and at least represented by the president in his budget, because here's the thing. My Democrat colleagues, and I consider Mr. Yarmouth a friend. I certainly consider my ranking member, Brendan Boyle, a friend. I mean, Scott Peters and I have a budget reform caucus together, and he's on my committee. So I don't mean any disrespect, but I haven't seen a real budget from any Democrat for 4 years. They've done a reconciliation shell budget, but they haven't done a real budget. So, but we do have a budget from, I think, representing the Democrat Party and Democrats in Washington. That's President Biden's budget. And we took a lot of time to unpack that and to provide the oversight that we're responsible for. And while we do lock in, we give flexibility to Ways and Means. I'm a Ways and Means guy, so we have flexibility there. But we do lock in the tax cuts and that for the lower income and middle class families. We lock in the tax incentives for small businesses to give them parity with the tax code as it applies to the corporations. So yeah, and I could go through those provisions. President Biden's budget raises taxes by $4.7 trillion. I would suggest to you that if the Democrats could get a $4.7 trillion tax cut through, they would have done it when they had total control of the House and Senate. They couldn't do it. Because even some Democrats that I know think that while we're trying to recover, we have millions of jobs that are still vacant, more than we had pre-COVID. We don't need to tax our job creators at this point. We don't need to make our American companies less competitive. We don't have, if you look at the tax per GDP and the spending per GDP, it's the spending that's running away from us. I think most Americans feel like Washington has a spending problem, not a tax problem. So I feel very comfortable that 80% of the American people would agree with that, and they would reject the notion of President Biden's budget coming in with the highest sustained levels of spending, $2.6 trillion more in entitlement spending when we haven't even paid for the entitlement programs we have, and then adding more taxes, more regulations, more government-run healthcare with its mandates. That model is a failed model. Those policies are failed economic policies. And the reckless, out-of-control spending, $11 trillion in 2 years, has created an absolute inflationary firestorm and cost of living crisis. So I think most of the American people are on our side. We need to lock in these tax breaks for working families. We need to incentivize growth so we have higher wages, so we can generate revenue in the growth for paying our bills and funding our priorities like defense. That's the playbook that we're going to run, and I think the American people are totally behind us on that. At least the majority of them are. Hey guys, you honor me by just being present and asking questions and covering this, and I'm grateful for that. Chuck, do you want to have a last word?
I'd just like to say thank you for all your attention. We appreciate you working to get this message out to the American people. And Mr. Chairman, I am so proud to be a part of this committee. As a businessman and a former legislator in North Carolina Senate, I know how to balance a budget to be fiscally responsible. And I've told folks while I was running for Congress that we need to do exactly in Washington, D.C. what we were able to do in North Carolina, which is essentially bring more NC to D.C. And I appreciate your leadership in helping us do that. Thank you.
I love it. All right. Chuck, thank you. And again, thank you guys for covering it. And we're happy to follow up with you if you have any more questions.
Thank you.